The demo for the Romancing Saga 2 remake is the first time I've played through a demo twice, not because it was so good that I needed to play more, but because I didn't know what to think when I first completed it. I'm not a mega fan of the Saga series by any means, but I've played a fair number of these games, and I love The Last Remnant, which is essentially a Saga spin-off, so I had to give this demo another shot, and I left the experience pretty satisfied. The combat is fast-paced, the levels are fun to navigate, and I think the production value here is of a high quality. But more than that, I was fascinated at how streamlined this game is. This is the strongest attempt Saga has ever made at appealing to new players, and I'm sure newcomers are gonna love how approachable this entry is, and I'm sure Saga fans are just happy to have more Saga to chew on. But here's the catch. Streamlining Saga is kind of missing the point of this series. Saga has always been a difficult series to approach because these games are not forthcoming with information. So many mechanics and systems are deliberately left invisible to encourage exploration and experimentation. This is a series where you can grind for a bit and inadvertently miss out on a half dozen side quests that you never even knew existed. This is a series where, in the original release of Romancing Saga 2, if you ran away from most battles, the enemies would still level up because the level scaling is dictated by the number of battles you participated in, not whether or not you emerged victorious. If this sounds obnoxious, it is, but that's sort of been the appeal of this series. This type of almost chaotic game design lets Saga carve out its niche. You don't play Saga seeking a traditional jRPG experience, you play this series because you want something different. There's an adventure feel to these games that doesn't feel anything like what you'd get out of a mainstream RPG. Getting lost, stumbling into a side quest that sends you into a dungeon packed with enemies that all one-shot you, randomly sparking a new skill at the best possible time, these all lead to memorable experiences that feel organic. That's the power of unscripted game design. You can miss huge chunks of the game without realizing it. You aren't forced to complete events in a specific order, which means every player can chart their own unique adventure. It's chaotic. It's a very anti-modern approach to game design, and there's not much else like it. So when the mission statement for the Romancing Saga 2 remake is, "Let's attract a wider audience," I can't help but scratch my head. There are countless traditional jRPGs released every year. Why does Saga need to throw its hat in the ring? The series creator, Kawazu, just released his latest entry, Emerald Beyond, earlier this year, so clearly there's enough of a dedicated fan base to keep this series around. I know Kawazu himself said his goal with this remake was to appeal to a wider audience, but my question is, why? And I know the answer is money, but more to the point, why now? This series is over 30 years old, and up through Emerald Beyond, I wouldn't say any of these games were approachable for a casual player. Even the easier entries like Saga Frontier aren't exactly friendly to your average everyday JRPG fan. Certain characters have easier campaigns than others, but you wouldn't know that ahead of time. A new player could choose a campaign that's much harder than the rest, find himself stuck, and wondering where he went wrong. And that's part of the charm of these games. They respect your intelligence enough for you to figure out what you're doing wrong. Some side quests are much harder than others, but the games don't tell you that. You experience that difficulty spike yourself, and make the determination whether to press on or look for an easier quest. That is what true adventuring feels like. You learn from your mistakes, and slowly build up to that minimum skill floor needed to succeed. And now, with this remake, the minimum skill floor has been dropped to a mere stepping stone. There are tutorials everywhere, there's a turn order meter, enemy weaknesses are permanently displayed once you strike them, there's a light bulb icon placed next to specific actions when you're ready to spark a new skill, your stat progress gauges are displayed during the battle results screen instead of remaining invisible, there are quest markers telling you where to go. The normal mode of the original Super Famicom game is called hard mode here to dissuade new players from choosing it. All of this is very un-Saga-like. That sense of mystery and experimentation is missing because the game doesn't want to scare away newcomers. But by catering to a wider audience, you're leaving behind the enduring legacy of this series. There are hundreds of turn-based RPGs that tell you exactly when you're about to level up. Why does Saga need to be more like them? I liked being surprised when my maximum HP increased. And there are toggles to make the game play like the older entries, but they are not disabled by default, which tells me that the devs don't expect most players to turn them off. You can disable the timeline, the weakness indicators, the light bulbs, but instead of forcing you to adapt to these systems that were once hidden, the game lets you turn them off to create a challenge run. Saga is now officially a modern jRPG. That's not meant to be interpreted as a pejorative, but it does mean that the series is losing some of that sense of adventure that made these games so unique and charming to begin with. Can I turn off all of these features to make the game more difficult and play more like the older games? Yes, but some new features like this overdrive gauge are reliant on you striking weaknesses, and some enemies charge up super attacks, and those actions are indicated on the timeline, which means the game is designed around these conveniences. And some streamlining changes are outside your control entirely. You can't escape the tutorial dungeon at the start anymore. You could in the original game. Also, why should a player be responsible for tuning the experience? Part of the fun of most video games, at least for me, is the learning phase, when you build up to the minimum skill floor needed to proceed. Just knowing that I can enable these toggles to streamline the experience, even if I don't intend on using them, just having those options teased is enough to influence my experience. Because I know if I'm ever struggling, I can just turn on these conveniences to lessen the burden. I don't need to put in that much effort to improve, because there exist in-game tools available to pull that skill ceiling down. You can tell that I'm a fan of arcade game design where you either rise to the challenge or you lose. The prevailing mentality of modern game design is accessibility. Games are designed with the path of least resistance in mind, so that as many players as possible that want to beat the game can beat it. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed this demo. I played it twice, and I left pretty optimistic. The things that made Saga appealing are still here, like sparking new skills, which is just as satisfying as it's ever been. Square promises to leave the free scenario system intact, where you can tackle quests in any order and your choices have meaningful outcomes. The succession system appears to be improved over the original game, because you can now abdicate the throne. I can't imagine a fan of the series hating this game, and if you really are dead set on having it play like the older games, there exist options to tune it that way. Even if it's not my ideal solution, it is a solution. This really does feel like a game that tried its best to appeal to everyone, and if that means more players can discover this series, and in turn lead to larger budgets for future entries, I can't say that this is a bad thing. But I can't help but feel like people that start with this game, who will go back and play the older entries, are gonna be in for a rude awakening when they realize just how much was streamlined here. Saga was never a series that catered to the casual audience up until this point, and by attracting that crowd, that might influence the direction the series takes moving forward. Kawazu has done an admirable job in sticking to his vision for 3 decades, and so long as he has a hand in this series, I don't think the formula will stray too far from its roots. And ultimately, the Romancing Saga 2 Remake demo was a fun time. I have no doubt the full release will be one of the better entries in the series. I just hope that the streamlining doesn't influence the future entries too much, because ultimately, there are 1,000 Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest clones out there, but there's only one Saga.